We're at the CROI in Seattle, 2019, and we appreciate John Koethe, who's taking the time away from the conference to talk with us. He's from Vanderbilt University in Nashville, and we really appreciate taking the time to take on the subject, which is really important to people living with AIDS, on weight gain, obesity, and the science around it. And we appreciate doing that for us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So speak to your poster or your presentation.
Sure. So I'll be giving a presentation here on obesity in the HIV population, and in particular on weight gain on antiretroviral therapy. So the recent literature, the recent studies in this have shown sort of a slow increase in the proportion of people with HIV who are also obese. And we've seen really a rise over the last 2 decades in the proportion of individuals who are obese to the point where today it essentially approximates the general population. So we're seeing rates of obesity among people living with HIV across the United States, somewhere in the range of 25 to 30% of the population. And in key demographic groups, including women and minorities, we're seeing rates that in certain geographic areas can actually be higher than the general population.
Mm-hmm. So how do you, and you've really been able to define specifics about HIV and the correlation?
We have in fact, and I think the reason why it's important is because many of the changes in lipid handling and energy handling that we see in HIV are actually similar to what we see in obesity. HIV infection, in the absence of ART, introduces a number of changes in the body's ability to handle lipids or fat, and leads to ectopic deposition of fat in a number of different organs, including around the heart, the liver, the muscle, and also in the viscera. This is actually very similar to what we see in obesity, with the ectopic lipid deposition and higher levels of fasting glucose and also fasting circulating free fatty acids. We've learned from a number of epidemiologic studies that the combination of HIV and obesity is particularly detrimental in terms of the risk and severity of metabolic disease. As an example, from the U.S. veteran population, we see that a equivalent weight gain among people with HIV compared to individuals without HIV confers a far higher risk of developing diabetes. And as people with HIV age, a higher BMI or body mass index confers a proportionally greater risk of developing diabetes over time. We're also seeing higher rates of cardiovascular disease among individuals with HIV and obesity, higher rates of liver disease, and higher rates of a number of other comorbidities. So it really does seem that the risks that are accompanying obesity are considerably higher among individuals with treated, suppressed, sort of long-term success on antiretroviral therapy with HIV. So it may represent a very important area of primary prevention.
Mm-hmm. So as far as trying to change this dynamic, would that be certainly exercise, which would make a difference, in food, trying to spread out your meals rather than do gluttony and so forth?
Indeed, yes.
All the things that we know are good maybe have to be a little more aggressive for people living with AIDS and on treatment. So, I mean, I know you mentioned there's other things that other metabolic issues that can evidence themselves as well, but you know, certainly heart disease is the one that's probably most stand out for people, and liver disease as well. So is there where would you go from here on the work that you're doing?
So I think one of the most interesting things that really needs to be contextualized is the overall weight in the United States and the sort of comorbidities accompanying what we could either call obesity or just sort of excess adiposity has been on the rise for the last 3 decades. And that's actually a worldwide phenomenon. We're seeing it across Europe, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and it's sort of broad changes in diet and activity patterns. So many people have actually referred to this as an obesogenic environment. And when you sort of look at sort of an overlay map of the United States by county, and you look at HIV prevalence, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, a number of other comorbidities, you see clusters. So one of the issues that we're facing now is that much of the HIV epidemic has actually, of new infections, has shifted in to either geographic areas or populations that already have very high levels of underlying obesity, and also a number of socioeconomic, sociocultural, other factors related to food availability, food security, exercise habits.
But different than in the past.
Different in the past, yes, absolutely. And we're seeing more of the overlap of multiple epidemics. And so, I think a lot of times we think about obesity as sort of exacerbating the development of these comorbidities in individuals with HIV, but for many people, and I think for the future, we're going to see HIV situated in an environment with elevated rates of these diseases at baseline. And so we have to kind of contextualize our approach to treatment in that it's not simply diet and exercise, it's also really looking at the larger environment of food availability, of the physical activity, of the walkability, the safety of neighborhoods, all of those things. On the individual level, though, exactly, I think that the studies that have been done so far have shown marked benefits, both in terms of metabolic and also cardiovascular health, with dietary and exercise interventions among people living with HIV, and really the ability to sort of bring one's risk profile for cardiometabolic diseases, as we would sort of describe the spectrum of these comorbidities, really down markedly with weight loss and with increased physical activity.
I think in the past, I think to say there's a difference between the past and current, it seems like we've been, over the years, becoming more and more dependent upon sitting in front of a TV or in front of a computer screen. And that, I'd love to see if there's a way to determine if that's in and of itself a real strong cause of this epidemic and obesity, as well as everything else, but that certainly could contribute. And you wouldn't take but maybe 2 or 3 more hours sitting in front of a computer, because it's fun. There's a lot to do there.
Absolutely.
But we have to say, okay, limit. It's kind of like you did in the old days when the parents said, you only have so much TV time. Well, that was when I was a kid, we only had 3 channels.
Absolutely.
Now we're different. It's like there's infinite amount. You could spend all day. You wouldn't even have to get out of bed, just staying watching TV all day long.
Absolutely.
Or a computer screen. So we have to say to ourselves, I've got to find a way to limit what I do and move and become more, because I know they did the walking study, and and the gait seemed to be a direct correlation to death. Or different speeds. So definitely need to think in those terms and maybe answer that question, through science.
Absolutely.
Research.
Yeah. If you look at trends in the U.S., some of the best studies are from the U.S. and Canada, and really if you look at trends over the past 30 years, in average physical activity, it has gone down year by year on a population basis, and actually total caloric intake has gone up markedly to the point where some of the estimates that I've seen are 50 to 60% more calories being consumed on a daily basis today than there were 30 to 40 years ago.
I think we're going to see more and more research on that at the CROI.
I think that's true.
Amongst all the others conferences on cardiovascular and so forth as well.
Yeah, indeed, indeed.
Well, you're on the right track. We just have to have more of you doing that work, I guess. So it's a good, another good field to get into in HIV.
Absolutely, yes. And I think that the one of the most interesting things at the CROI this year really is the number of studies looking at integrase inhibitors and weight gain. And so that is something that I think will need to be teased out a bit more in the future. While a number of these have shown sort of higher rates of weight gain among people starting integrase inhibitors or switching to integrase inhibitors, I thought the presentation yesterday from HBTN 077 showing no change in weight with cabotegravir in individuals without HIV is really food for thought and a reason to pause as we look at these studies and await more perspective data.
Another way to approach it, yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, John. Thank you.